Today, spotlight on the New Zealand housing conundrum. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, where this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian and New Zealand flavour. There was a very significant article in Bloomberg Wealth entitled, "It's beautiful and virtually COVID-free, just don't try to buy a house there." Prices are surging for even the most dilapidated homes in New Zealand, one of the world's most unaffordable property markets, they said. Famous for its handling of the pandemic, its stunning mountain scenery and its trailblazing Prime Minister, New Zealand is now becoming known for something else, one of the least affordable housing markets in the world. Here's a case in point. A 32-year-old insurance case manager has been looking for a home in the country's capital, Wellington, for 10 months, often jostling with up to 100 other people at public viewings. She saw about 60 properties and had 10 offers rejected before finally succeeding in that time. Asking prices soared, forcing her to expand her initial budget of 700,000 New Zealand dollars 4 times just to compete. That 10 months cost me upwards of 150,000 New Zealand dollars in terms of house price values, she said. It's just mind-blowing, and I don't quite know how to make sense of that. I'm offering everything I have. I won't have any savings left in order to make this happen, and that's a really scary prospect. New Zealand now ranks as one of the most expensive housing markets relative to income in the OECD. Auckland, home to a third of the country's population, is the 4th least affordable city in the world, according to urban planning consultancy Demographia. There are fears that house prices have entered bubble territory. They surged more than 20% in the year through to February, taking the national median price to 780,000 New Zealand dollars. But in Auckland, it's jumped to 1.1 million New Zealand dollars. Behind the explosion in prices is ultra-loose monetary policy that has sent borrowing costs to historic lows and fueled a rush into higher-yielding investments such as property. Those forces are driving up values globally, but New Zealand, which vanquished COVID-19 and is recovering sooner than most, has become a poster child for the boom. Every week seems to bring new stories of unimaginable prices being paid. In March, a modest 3-bedroom bungalow in the desirable Auckland suburb of Green Lane sold at auction for 5.98 million New Zealand dollars, some 2.6 New Zealand dollars above its local council valuation, according to real estate website One Roof. Even dilapidated homes, known as dungas, in New Zealand are in hot demand. In January, a tumble-down 3-bedroom house with peeling paint and boarded-up windows sold for 1.81 million New Zealand dollars in the Auckland suburb of Avondale, revealing the value of the land it sits on to developers. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who came to office pledging to close the gap between rich and poor, is under increasing pressure to cool the market as more and more first-time buyers are locked out. Ownership has fallen to the lowest rate since the 1950s, 65%, in a country where owning your own home has always been a cultural rite of passage. Homeowners are typically 14 times wealthier than non-home owners, according to government figures. Wellington couple Catherine and Blair Duckett feel left behind. They have struggled to save the required 20% deposit for a mortgage while bringing up 3 boys and paying rent to live in an area with good skills. How the hell do we manage to save 200,000 New Zealand dollars for a deposit and live, asked Blair, a 46-year-old surveyor. If we didn't need a deposit, we would have had a house years ago. We can service a mortgage. We've never missed a rent payment. Catherine, 47, explains they chose to put their children's education ahead of buying a house, but being forced to make that choice still hurts. We don't tell people we are renting. It's a stigma, she said. People say we've missed the boat. The median house price is now 6.7 times the average annual household income, according to Infometrics. To get back to an affordable multiple of about 3 times, the economic consultancy estimates there would need to be a 55% drop in house prices or a 123% lift in household incomes. The government has started to roll out a suite of measures to tilt the playing field in favour of first-time buyers and away from investors who have been long enjoying tax breaks and are often able to outbid newcomers. In February, Finance Minister Grant Robertson passed part of the responsibility for moderating house price gains to the central bank, requiring it to pay more attention to the property market when setting monetary and financial policy. That could see further macroprudential restrictions imposed on investors, such as debt-to-income ratios and limits on interest-only lending. Then last month, Arden clamped down on tax rules that encourage speculative investments in residential rental property. The ability of investors to claim mortgage interest as a tax-deductible expense will be phased out, and the period in which profits on the sale of investment property are taxed will be extended to 10 years from 5. Kelvin Davidson, senior economist at property research company CoreLogic, said the measures are unlikely to have much impact on prices in the near term, given the weight of demand. What we're expecting is a slowdown in sales, not as much activity, but in terms of prices, just slower growth, not falls, he said. The New Zealand Property Investors Federation has slammed the changes, saying they'll reduce the supply of rental properties and drive up rents as landlords try to recoup the extra costs. The real issue is a lack of housing supply, it said. New Zealand will need to see an extended period of high building levels to address the undersupply of housing before the housing crisis is addressed, said Brad Olson, a senior economist at Infometrics. The government's housing package is an important start to addressing housing concerns, but more is needed to free up land for more houses. The Duckets see little in the government's measures for them. It's just a tease, said Blair. You'll get your hopes up again, and then they get dashed, and eventually you just give up. For Femberger, however, her tortuous house hunting saga has reached a happy end. Last week, her $825,000 offer on a 2-bedroom semi-detached unit was accepted. I ended up spending significantly more than my original budget, and I ended up buying something I would never have considered at the beginning, she said. There have been significant compromises, but I'm still really happy. And this, I think, highlights 2 points. Firstly, the psychology that people are still worrying about missing out and trying to extend to get into the market. That, of course, is when prices are probably as high as they're going to be for some time, and the income multiples are massively extended. But the other point is this argument again about lack of supply comes up again and again and again. There is a lack of affordable supply, but that's a price-related issue, not a stock-related issue. In fact, there are many vacant properties and many new builds currently underway in New Zealand. The problem is not one of supply. The problem is more to do with central bank settings, low interest rates, very free lending, and frankly, the desire to create the wealth effect to support the economy and support GDP growth. I fear that just building more stuff when prices remain high doesn't solve anything and perhaps will create a bigger issue later. And yet, it seems to me that the supply card is one being played both in New Zealand and in Australia. The bottom line is this. This is 20 years plus of bad policy, both in Australia and New Zealand, now coming to a head. And whilst prices might go higher for a small period ahead, at some point, things will turn. And by the way, if the virus is not under control, then of course it can turn sooner than we might expect. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.